How you doing you all? Welcome back to our channel. So in this video we are gonna see, what if Ichigo has almighty and time travel back? Part 1. And if you want more like these then please leave a like, share and subscribe. And do support author of this story. And name of the fanfic is Moonless Guys Touched by Noxilicious, so do check it out. Let's get in the video. It is said that only the strongest know what pain is. They know because that's what drives them to become strong. So then, after all the pain that Ichigo had experienced, why couldn't he be strong enough? This lone thought occupied Kurosaki Ichigo's mind as he watched Aizen's struggling form after he experienced said substitute Shinigami's Mujutsu technique. Seeing that the madman was still trying to get up, he shunpoed next to him and watched if he would be back to fighting, an idea that horrified him. After a few seconds though, the brown-haired transcender's arms gave out under him and he fell back, eyes lifeless, and our hero sighed in relief. Finally, he had defeated Aizen. He sacrificed his powers and with them his partners, his Hollow and his Zanpakuto, to end the Winter War. After much spilled blood and many fallen warriors, it was over. He could finally rest easily. Perhaps he could go check on his friends. Ichigo's now red eyes widened in shock as he realized what he was thinking about. He couldn't check on his friends. No, he couldn't because they were dead. This brought him back to the main question of his life. What was he supposed to do now? He failed to protect Inoue, who was killed by the two female rancor while he was fighting Ulquiorra, which made him go insane with sorrow and turn hollow. Renji and Ishido also got killed by Sailaporo in their fight because the captains arrived too late. Eventually Chad also died because Unohana-san got there too late and couldn't do anything to save him. Most of the captains in the living world, including Sui Feng, Toshiro, Yuki-Take-sen and Gramps, also died during their fights. He cringed when he remembered the sight of a lone, injured Kairaku-san left to pick up the remains of Gate 13. Many of the Vizard also got either injured or killed, dragging down with them many of the rancor. His old man and Yoruichi-san died trying to stall Aizen, and Urahara-san was forced to pass on the secret of the final Jutsuga Tensho to Ichigo in Isen's place. His human friends were already dead by the time he reached the real Karakura town. He was forced to watch his sister's lifeless, shocked expression, eyes wide open, as he still had to defeat Aizen. In the end, no matter how human Ichigo could be, he couldn't forgive Aizen for what he did to his loved ones. If only Rukia could see him right now. She'd certainly beat him up for sulking. If only she were alive. Thinking about her, he raised his head to stare at the sky. The dark clouds were glaring at him, as if blaming him for so many people's deaths. Dark clouds reminded him of her icy blade. How she wielded her pure Sode no Shirayuki with so much grace that she looked like she was dancing. Rukia. His knees gave up and he collapsed on them, still staring at the sky. Soon, little drops of rain fell on his face. Those drops turned into full-blown rain, soaking his long, black hair in gray bandages. He smiled bitterly when he realized that probably the sky was crying for his loss. Unable to contain it any longer, Ichigo clenched his teeth as he lowered his head and hot tears rolled down his cheeks. Why did they have to die? Why was I so weak? Why? He murmured to himself. His hands clenched into fists so hard that his nails dug into his skin and drew blood. Shakily, he tilted his head back and he gave out a pained roar. Why? His mind was numb, his skin cold. He sat there and cried it all out, not realizing that he had yet to lose his powers, neither that a bright light was heading towards him. Suddenly, he was brought back to reality when he felt something warm touch his cheek. His eyes snapped open. There stood a woman, dressed in a long, white robe, with long golden hair flowing out behind her. Seeing his shocked expression, she simply smiled sadly. I think that you've suffered long enough, my child. You deserve so much more than this. What do you wish for? She said gently. As surprised as he was, Ichigo found himself pondering his answer. Finally, he answered. I wish for a chance to go back and stop this war. His eyes stared at the woman, burning with determination. She smiled proudly. So it shall be done. And that was the last thing he remembered before darkness engulfed him. Numb. Why was everything so numb? Aizen he defeated Aizen friend's old man, Yuzu, Karen, all dead. The war had ended. It rained and he cried. Then, what? His head was throbbing as he was trying to recall what had happened and help himself come back to reality. There was this woman wait. Suddenly, his eyes split wide open and he found himself lying on the grassy ground of the park. He was back in Karakura town. What the hell? He uttered confusedly. Last time he checked he was outside Karakura and there was this blonde lady, she had this strange but kind aura about her that gave him no room for resistance. He told her he wished to go back in time. But she couldn't have fulfilled his wish, could she? As a matter of fact, she did, a young, male voice said clearly in his head. Ichigo's eyes widened again. Zanjetsu, Ichigo thought in shock. He thought he felt his Zanpakuto smiling, but waved it off. Tensa Zanjetsu, but nevertheless, yes, Tensa replied amusedly. Boy, you shitty king, don't you dare forget 'bout me. His hollow yelled in annoyance. Ichigo's eyebrow twitched. And really say I missed you too much, hollow, he replied half-heartedly. The hollow mock gasped, how dare you. After all we've done for you, you can't even admit you missed my heartwarming presence. Traitor. Ichigo chose to ignore him this time. Z Tensa, I'm sorry for having to use that technique. I'm sorry I chose to abandon you too, but I couldn't bring myself to risk anyone's life anymore. In the end, I couldn't save anyone, he explained bitterly. The Zanpakuto scowled. There's no use brooding over the past. Right now, it seems as if we were given a second chance, he said calmly. But this, the Shinigami was brought back to reality. About that, who the hell was that woman? To be able to keep my powers, he mumbled in confusion. Does that even matter? What matters is that we're freaking back and you're still a freaking Shinigami, which means she could have made your wish come true. And that means that we might have gone back in time, the hollow said. Tensa Zanjetsu nodded. He's right, Ichigo, we should check if we have really time traveled. Ichigo agreed. He stood there a few seconds, trying to figure out in which part of the Karakura he was, then he shunpoed his way towards the Urahara Shoten. It was night, so he could easily travel over buildings without worrying that someone with spiritual pressure might notice him. In no more than 2 minutes, he traveled half the city and reached his destination. Taking a deep breath and mentally praying, he prepared to knock on the double door when he suddenly felt a high spiritual pressure appear. Glancing back at the Urahara Shoten, he shook his head and headed for the source of the spiritual pressure. It seemed familiar, but since he always sucked at sensing Ryatsu, he couldn't figure out who it was. Soon, he landed in a tree near a dimly lit street. Wait, this is where I. Don't move. Ichigo's eyes widened. He turned to look at the owner of the voice. Rukia, he whispered brokenly. She's alive, she's really alive. There stood Rukia, dressed in his sister's dress, eyes full of tears, halfway turning to look at himself. What the fuck? Ichigo thought as he stared, jaw slack. It truly was him, lying on the ground, garbed in Shinigami outfit, with a mop of orange hair on the top of his head. He shivered involuntarily. It felt really weird to see himself, without looking in a mirror. Figures. We've only been sent here. Doesn't really mean we're part of this realm, Tensa muttered. Also there was Byakuya and Renji. This was just before Rukia was taken back to the Soul Society. Maybe I can stop them from taking her. But how do I do that without shocking pretty much everyone? I mean, it must be weird to see a clone of someone suddenly appear next to said someone, he rambled. In case you haven't noticed, you're still in Jutsuga form, so that might just work out for you, his hollow helped. True to the fact, when Ichigo glanced at himself, he saw the gray bandages and tattered flaring black pants. While he could stay and ponder over why he hadn't lost his powers and gone back to being orange-haired, he decided that he could figure that out later. So, having made up his mind, Ichigo shunpoed towards the unaware Shinigami. Byakuya was just about to tell Renji to open the Sinkamen when he suddenly felt a new presence appear behind him. Turning around, he noticed a strange male, with long, black hair, red eyes and dressed in gray bandages and Reptakama. Who are you? And why are you here? He asked unflinchingly. Next to him, Rukia stared at the intruder in shock and with traces of fear. This stranger didn't seem to have any spiritual pressure, so why was he here, staring at them? The stranger stared at Byakuya for a second, glanced at Rukia, and then turned back to Byakuya. I am Ugetsu, why I am here does not matter. What matters is finding out how I managed to outdo you and how to get Rukia back, the black-haired man said, his strong, masculine voice sounding clearly despite his face being covered. That being said, Mugetsu suddenly disappeared, quickly grabbing Rukia by the waist, then throwing Ichigo over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, and headed for the Urahara Shoten. Rukia blinked as she took in her surroundings. She was at the Urahara Shoten. How the hell did they get here so fast? Mugetsu put Rukia down, but still didn't let go of her shoulder. I know you have many questions, but just if I let go of you, don't run away. I can help you, he whispered. She was still suspicious of him and shocked that they managed to escape her Nai-sama, but decided to trust his words for now. So she nodded. The man let go of her shoulder and banged his hand on the Shoten's double door, only to hit a shocked Urahara Kisuke's forehead. Mugetsu quickly drew his hand back. Sorry about that. Now, instead of having to go find Ichigo on your own, I brought him to you, so mind letting us in. We're kinda in a hurry. Kisuke took one more moment to stare in shock at Mugetsu, then at Rukia, then at the bloodied Ichigo. Deciding that they had time for discussions later, he let the three in then quickly closed the doors and locked them. "S.I." the shopkeeper called. He glanced at the black-haired man. "Please hand Kurosaki-san to my assistant and follow me." Mugetsu nodded, handing his past self over to the Keto expert, then following Urahara towards his meeting room. Seating themselves at the table, Mugetsu prepared himself for any questions that would be thrown at him. He decided that, since these were two of his closest friends, namely his mentor and his best friend, he couldn't really lie to them, so he would answer anything that they would ask him, without adding information that wasn't requested, so that he wouldn't change the timeline too much. With a mental sigh, he realized that it was already pretty much messed up because of his saving Rukia. "Who are you?" Rukia asked. Mugetsu mentally smirked. "Pretty blunt. As I have already told your older brother, I am Mugetsu," he replied smoothly. Rukia didn't seem to like his answer, as her eye twitched. Urahara decided to take over, she asked for your real name. "My real name isn't gonna help you in any way, and I don't have the expenses to reveal it to you, but I will tell you, one day. After this whole Aizen shit is over," the black-haired male said bitterly. Rukia's eyes widened. "Are you talking about Aizen Sasuke? The Taichu of the 5th Division? What does he have to do with all this?" she said, staring in shock. Mugetsu sighed. "Might as well tell you the entire story. Look, Rukia, Aizen is not who he seems to be. He was going to betray the Soul Society after he took out an important tool that was placed inside your soul, the Hijoku," he explained. In less than a second, Kisuke was pointing the tip of Benahim, who was in Shikai, at the stranger's neck. "How do you know about the Hijoku?" he asked harshly. Mugetsu stared at him, unblinking. Then, he pushed the blade away with one finger. "Do not threaten me, Urahara-san. I am on your side, rest assured," he said. Urahara stood there, staring at this alien with newfound awe. Suddenly, the alien continued, "Please remove the Hijoku from Rukia's soul. I am going to dispose of Aizen before he finds out that she no longer holds it," said alien continued. Sighing, Urahara sheathed his Zanpakuto and sat back. He raised a hand to rub his nose bridge in distress. "You save these two, and then you reveal that you know quite a deal about our situation, including classified information, and then you push aside my blade like it was made of feathers. I don't know whether to trust you or to grab Kichiki-sen here and run for it," he said wearily. Urahara was a great strategist, almost everyone who has heard of him knew, so for him to get lost on what to do was catastrophic. Mugetsu gave a small smile, though they couldn't see it through the bandages. "Urahara-san, I am willing to put my head on a silver plate if that's what's necessary for you to accept my help. I wish I could tell you more about myself, but there are certain circumstances that do not allow me to do so. When I will be able to, though, I will tell you. But for the moment, I only ask that you listen to my advice, because if you do not, I am afraid that the people involved will have to suffer for our mistakes," he explained, bowing his head after doing so. "Will you?" Rukia, who for a while now had been shocked into silence, bit her lip to contain her horror and spoke. "You have my trust, Mugetsu. I don't know if this is foolish, but for now I choose to trust you," she said tiredly. Urahara glanced at her and sighed. "Again. I will trust you. Don't make me regret my decision," he demanded. Mugetsu nodded. "Alright then, since Rukia has not been taken to the Soul Society, she will not reach Sakyoku Hill to be executed, and Aizen will not have the chance to grab the Hijoku and retreat to Hueco Mundo. Train Ichigo, and when he is ready, we will leave for the Soul Society, and I will take down Aizen myself. However, I want you to take the Hijoku out of Rukia, since it is only bringing trouble to her person. I will help you find a way to get rid of it once and for all," he explained his plan to the ex-captain. Even if mildly surprised at the information the man knew, Kisuke nodded. "I suppose it could work. But how are you so sure you will be able to defeat him?" he asked. The black-haired male scowled. "I already did it once. I can do it one more time." At this, the shopkeeper's eyebrows shot up to his hairline. Rukia stared blankly at the table for a few seconds, then looked at Mugetsu. "Something's bothering me," she said simply. Mugetsu stared at her, waiting for her question. "Why is Aizen doing all this? I mean, he seems really powerful already, much more so than the captains, so then why go to such lengths to achieve this item?" Urahara's expression turned somber, and the stranger's brows furrowed. "Finally," said stranger spoke up. "Hijoku is a tool that can grant one's heart's desires. It can create, morph, improve and fool. Aizen believes that the Sirite and its rulers, the royal family, have a corrupt way of ruling the afterlife. So he wishes to kill the Spirit King and practically become God," he explained. The petite Shinigami's eyes widened. Kisuke shook his head. Madman. "I'm glad I faced reality and abandoned such thoughts," he muttered. Mugetsu chuckled, "Me too. I wouldn't be able to defeat him if you wouldn't have done so." And once again, Urahara found himself perplexed. As he brushed off any more thoughts about this man's past, the ex-captain looked at Mugetsu. "It's been a long night. I suggest getting a bit of sleep. Tomorrow I plan to take out the Hijoku and maybe start Kurosaki-sen's training." Do you have a place to spend the night at, Mugetsu-san? Said man shook his head. Alright, follow me to your room. Finishing their conference, they stood and Kisu guided them through his residence. Rukia sighed as she walked back to her room after having changed in a white yukata. Today has been a very stressing day, she thought. First off, I almost got arrested by Nai-sama and Renji. Ichigo got critically injured, Mugetsu saved our asses. And then there was the recent discussion. Sighing, she put away those frustrating thoughts and decided to have a nice rest. When she entered the room, she was surprised to find Mugetsu dressed in a similar white yukata, taking off his bandages. Her eyes widened and she stopped in her tracks. He did not seem to notice her as he slowly unwrapped his mask, revealing a masculine, well-defined face structure, with high cheekbones and a sharp chin. His long, unruly black hair had been tied in a low ponytail, so she could now clearly see the broadness of his shoulders. After a few seconds though, he reached the neck where the bandage that had been previously covering his chest continued. Putting the bandages away, he finally noticed her staring at him. He smirked boyishly in amusement. To say that she was surprised to see his well-sculpted face was an understatement. She was practically gaping at him, surprised to see such familiarity in his features, and surprised to find herself charmed by same features. Blushing, she turned to look another way. Anyway would have been as long as she did not meet his eyes. Like what you see. He teased. Though, mentally he was scolding himself for saying that, yelling at his hollow's perversity. With newfound confidence, she stared at him and stuck her tongue, maybe. Though you look very much like Ichigo. At this, Mugetsu was inwardly starting to panic. Except he doesn't have that sharp, mature look. He's still a big baby. Too bad, he would have had popularity with girls if he did. He mentally sighed. After realizing the implications of her words though, his cheeks gained a rosy tint and he raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting something? He asked. Maybe, she escaped again. Chuckling, he sat on his futon, buried himself under sheets, then turned to her. God, I missed you so much he muttered, his lips stretching in a sad smile. Did you say something? She asked, feigning not hearing what he said. When he shook his head and turned to face the window, she frowned in concern. I know he has a complicated past behind him, but how could he have known me? That distant expression I feel sorry for him, though I don't know why. Sighing a little, she closed her eyes. I guess we will find out, soon enough. Mugetsu shot up in his bed and rubbed his sore ears. Chuckling, he stood and headed for the source of the not-so-manly scream. On the way there, he encountered the dirty blonde shopkeeper. He's awake, isn't he? The black-haired male asked. Urahara just nodded and grinned deviously. Expression turning serious, Mugetsu glanced at the door leading to Ichigo's room. Begin his training as fast as you can. I'll know when to step in. Isuke stared for a moment at the other man, as if trying to figure something out. Eyes widening a bit, he turned and headed for said room. You're one mysterious fellow, aren't you, Kurosaki Ichigo? I guess you may have one good reason for doing this. Rukia was eating her breakfast, thinking about the previous day and preparing herself for today's events. Hijoku, I don't even know what it looks like, yet it is inside me. Are we really just pawns in a bigger game? Me, Renji, Nai-sama. Suddenly, she was brought out of her musings when a long, slender finger hit her forehead. She jumped and raised her hands to cover said spot, eyes widening comically. There stood Mugetsu, on the opposite side of the table, fingers still raised in the position it ended up after he poked her. What the hell, you fool? Rukia exclaimed, rubbing the sore spot. Mugetsu shrugged. You were moping. Had this big ugly frown on your face, he explained, uncaringly. Her eye twitched and jumped, preparing to kick him. Unfortunately, he dodged and she ended up on the floor, spluttering. As he laughed at her predicament, she scowled and elbowed him. Hard. Ow. What the hell, insane midget? He exclaimed as she had done before. You poked me. And, you dodged. She reasoned. Mugetsu's eyebrows twitched comically. And I should have let you beat me up? For what? A light poke. You must be deranged, he complained. She opened her mouth to retort but ended up closing it, remembering her current predicament. Seeing this, the man's eyes softened. Don't worry. You won't feel a thing, he said. Rukia shook her head. That's not what I'm worried about. I mean, there's this big affair going on and Agate 13 had no idea about it. Hell, I didn't know I was a host for the most desired tool in the afterlife, she said, eyebrow furrowing. Mugetsu scowled. Well, I know for a fact that Aizen planned my entire existence in this affair, except me killing him. So, yeah, you're not alone in all this. But at least, it's going to be over in a few weeks. Then we can go on about our lives, he explained. The petite Shinigami's eyes widened. Aizen planned his entire existence. And I thought I was a victim he must have felt broken at finding out. Seeing Rukia's sympathetic look, he shook his head, don't look at me like that. As I already said, it will soon be over, so my situation doesn't really matter all that anymore." He closed his eyes and crossed his arms, as if in deep thought. After a few seconds, he stood. "Come. Let's see if we can get that little bastard out," he said and motioned for her to follow him. Rukia bit her lip. The memories of a harsh childhood overwhelmed her, a pain in the stomach present. If my childhood was harsh, how was his? Such pained eyes putting depressing thoughts aside, she followed him, bracing herself for the next challenge. Zangetsu. After the dust had settled, Urahara was able to study the boy's large Zanpakuto. It seemed like he managed to impress him once again. "Since you gained your Zanpakuto, we can now begin," Urahara began. Unfortunately, he was cut off by the appearance of the black-haired man, Mugetsu. "May I step in?" the man asked. Ichigo stared at him suspiciously. This was the man who saved him on the night Byakuya and Renji came. He was still covered in the same grey bandages and black hakama. Urahara retreated and Mugetsu turned to face him. "What are you doing?" Ichigo asked confusedly. Mugetsu raised an eyebrow. "From now on, I'm training you. But first, we need to have a little chat." It was Ichigo's turn to raise his eyebrows. About what you're training for," he replied. "Rukia escaped arrest and certain execution. What are you going to do once we finish your training?" "I don't know," he answered truthfully. He really had no idea what he was doing. Rukia didn't need to be rescued, so then, why was he training? "Let me tell you a few things. There's a reason Rukia should have been in Soul Society now and not really for execution. Aizen Sasuke, a captain of the Gate 13, had planned for a century her meeting with you," Mugetsu said. Ichigo's eyes widened and his jaw went slack. 100 years ago, as a captain, Urahara Kisuke had created the Hijoku, which grants the one it finds worthy their most intimate desires. Aizen wanted to use it to become God, so Urahara hid it in the soul of a baby. "In Rukia's soul," he continued. "He had been planning your existence. Planned you meeting her, planned her giving you Shinigami powers, so that she would have to be executed. Planned you going to rescue her, so that after you destroyed the object of her execution and the captains were distracted, he could take the Hijoku out of her soul. He even planned for you mother to die," Mugetsu explained. At this, Ichigo was horrified. He was no longer able to think straight. Mom. So he. Mugetsu nodded. He was the one who sent Grand Fisher to the living world, precisely, Karakura town. He knew the Hollow would be attracted to your mother's Hiriatsu, as well as yours. The young Shinigami stared blankly at the ground. "It was all my fault." Ichigo was on the verge of starting an entire speech about how he was at fault, however, he was cut off by a flying punch. When he hit the ground, he stood weakly and rubbed his sore cheek, staring shocked at his assailant. Mugetsu glared at him. "It wasn't your damn fault. Stop blaming yourself. It was Aizen's. Aizen's. He sent Grand Fisher to kill your mother, he convinced Yukitake to send Rukia to the living world so that you two could meet, and he was the one who aided Aburai Renji with high-tech tools so that he could successfully capture Rukia. He planned your entire existence." At this point, the young Kurosaki didn't know what to think of the entire situation. He had a feeling that this stranger wasn't lying, and because of that, he ended up choking on whatever words he planned to pass. What am I supposed to do now?" Ichigo said, coiling and grabbing his head. The black-haired male grimaced. It hurt to see himself in agony, but this was necessary. "There is only one thing you can do. Fight," Mugetsu said. Ichigo raised his head slightly to look at him. "Fight, grow stronger, protect. Isn't that what your name means? The name your mother gave you? One who protects, right? Aizen isn't dead yet. I'm going to kill him, but I need your help to infiltrate the Soul Society. What do you say? Will you help me end this madman's plans?" Such strong eyes, this man, who is he? Ichigo thought, staring at the stranger amazed. Though he'd never admit it, he was absently accepting the fact that he could learn a lot from him. He knew way too much about him, but then again, Urahara was a pretty mysterious fellow too, so he brushed it off for the moment. Ichigo stood and clenched his fists, eyes burning with determination. "Train me, Mugetsu. We'll end this Aizen once and for all." Behind his mask, Mugetsu smirked. It seemed like Jin had rubbed off on him. Those were the kind of eyes his younger self had to have. Strong, fiery, determined eyes. "Grab your partner, Ichigo. Keep aware. Don't relax, don't underestimate. I'm not as forgiving as Urahara. Tolerance is the last thing you need if you want to get strong," the wild transcender declared. "Here I come," he whispered, and he disappeared. Ichigo's eyes widened. Where could he have disappeared to? Suddenly, there was a slight breeze brushing past his shoulder and he felt himself pinned down by a strong force. He felt air leave his lungs as Mugetsu's foot crushed his chest. Said attacker scoffed. "Gee. You are lucky I chose to just pin you down. If I intended to kill you, you'd be dead before you had any time to register it." The young Shinigami swallowed heavily. Mugetsu scowled and continued, "This just shows that you aren't even near good enough for Soul Society. It also shows that you did not take my warning to heart. I will not hesitate to take your life the next time you aren't paying enough attention." Shunpoing away from Ichigo, Mugetsu stood there, arms crossed, watching as the Shinigami got up slowly. After he regained his composure, the black-haired male attacked him again. This time, Ichigo dodged the older man's fist. He watched as a small crater formed in the place the punch landed. Mugetsu, however, spared no time and quickly weighed himself on his hands and kicked the orange-haired Shinigami in the ribs, sending him flying in a boulder. Jumping back on his feet, he watched as the dust settled and the Shinigami slowly got up from the pile of rubble, coated in light scratches. "Damn. You kick harder than Rukia," Ichigo joked. Mugetsu chuckled. "Tell that to her face," he replied. Unfortunately for the younger male, the black-haired transcender disappeared again. As soon as he reappeared, Ichigo ducked a fist aimed to his head and stepped back to dodge another. However, he soon found himself cornered, having reached the boulder with his back, and Mugetsu launched a high kick, landing just beside Ichigo's head, cracking the boulder until it was completely destroyed. The Shinigami's eyes widened. Mugetsu got back in a relaxed stance. "Only dodging isn't gonna help you win. It keeps you alive, yes, but at one point, you will not be able to dodge anymore. Fight back," he lectured. Ichigo nodded and Mugetsu shunpoed a few feet away, then charged again. When he launched a sidekick, Ichigo blocked it with the temporarily forgotten Zangetsu's blunt side. Mugetsu smirked when he shunpoed away in order to dodge a slash from said Zanpakuto. Charging once again, he jumped in the air and by the time he was 10 feet above the Shinigami, he brought down his right foot in a Reiatsu charge kick. Not fast enough to register, Ichigo brought up his left arm to block. Mugetsu grinned. "Wrong move," he said, as Ichigo found himself overwhelmed by the strength of the kick and struggled to block it, creating a crater beneath his feet. Soon though, his arm gave up and he jumped back to avoid the landing. Turning to look at his arm, he found it slightly burned, a black bleeding mark visible where the foot landed. Biting his lip, he scowled and turned to look at Mugetsu. "Is this the power of a captain?" Mugetsu stared at him for a second. "Yes. This is the power of a captain and Shikai." Ichigo's eyes widened. "Only Shikai? So then, does that mean that this man is at his limit if he doesn't use the power equal to Bankai? Does he even have a Zanpakuto?" "I cannot tell, Ichigo. His Reiatsu is suppressed to the point one would state he is dead, so I do not know if he has a partner or not. However, judging by how he wants us to work together, I would say he has," the wise voice of Zangetsu sounded in his head. "See Zangetsu? You can talk to me while I'm not in my inner world?" Ichigo asked in shock. By the feeling of it, the Zanpakuto must have scowled. "Of course. Nonetheless, his appearance is familiar," he muttered. Shrugging of the shiver that run down his spine, Ichigo grabbed Zangetsu with both hands and charged. Mugetsu raised an eyebrow. Finally, he seems to be getting the idea, he thought. When Ichigo brought down his sword and he was finally thinking that he got him, Mugetsu simply stood there, not making a move to dodge. As soon as the blade made contact with his skin, Ichigo froze, unable to move or think when he found that there was no blood leaking. "There is no blood because you are not aiming to kill. Because there's no power in your blade. You couldn't even cut my hair with this kind of attack," Mugetsu said. "I am aiming to kill you. Find resolve to try and kill me too." Pushing back the frozen Shinigami a few feet, he built up a bit of Reiatsu so that it would leak out. It enveloped him in a black, heavy aura as he took a stance. His red eyes glinted blue as he stared determined at his past self. "Your fear is what's stopping you from advancing. You fear that you might kill me, you fear that you might get killed, and you fear that those you protect might get killed as well. When you dodge, think I won't let them cut me. When you protect them, I won't let them die. If you attack, I will kill them. Now show me, Ichigo. Show me your resolve," he declared, quoting his mentor's words. He watched as his past self's eyes turned blue as he dodged his attacks. At one point, he blocked his arm with his blade and a small cut appeared there. Mugetsu smirked and jumped in the air, disappearing. A few moments later, he was bringing down another kick upon Ichigo, leaving black flame-like Reiatsu as a trail. He watched as Ichigo brought up his sword, bluish Reiatsu engulfing him. "Itsuga Tenshu," he yelled and released the familiar blue arc of energy. The arc engulfed Mugetsu as he tried to block it with simply his arms. A few moments later, the Reiatsu had risen to show Mugetsu, the bandages on his chest a bit ripped off. He was holding a Reishi-made sword in his right hand. Ichigo grinned. "Finally," he said, as he collapsed and fell asleep. The other male chuckled. "Maybe Urahara was right when he said I'm a freaky kid," he said, smirking. "We're done," Mugetsu announced, and Ichigo fell to his knees, panting. "Use these last 2 days to rest and spend time with your family. Urahara will announce you of when exactly to leave your house. Ichigo nodded, taking a deep breath and re-entering his body. Just before climbing the stairs to the shoten, he turned his head halfway to glance at the older man. Thank you. At first, I was really wary of you, but you proved your intentions and helped me a lot, he said sincerely. Mugetsu smiled. Glad I could help. And soon, the boy disappeared up into the shoten. Finally alone, he sat on the dusty ground and closed his eyes to gather his thoughts. Okay, let's recap up until now. My friends and family died. I killed Aizen. I succumbed to despair. Suddenly, this lady appears out of nowhere and grants me a wish when I state it to her because of the aura that gave no room for discussion and my temporary breakdown. I find myself back in time and end up saving Rukia and my past self's asses. I get a sword to my neck from my old mentor and then I train my younger version in the means of fighting. I have to agree with ya, Kinji. Your current life pretty much sucks, the hollow cackled. Mugetsu frowned. Well, that is true, I am truly glad that it is this way. The way things are going, many people won't have to suffer by the time this ends. Tensa Zangetsu agreed on this matter. As soon as this ends, you will have to take some decisions to have a peaceful life, too. We cannot go back to our own time, I believe, but this realm's Ichigo is still present. You cannot take his place. A sad smile pulled at his lips. Yeah. You're right. It'll be hard to treat my sisters and my friends as if I am someone else. I bet Rukia already has her eyes on this time's Ichigo. Tensa stayed silent. In this situation, there was no advice he could possibly give. His master's heart had been struck and it seemed that not even going back in time to see his loved one again won't heal it. The hollow, however, didn't seem to agree with his Zanpakuto and he made his opinion known, pretty loudly too. Oh, don't you dare go all mopey on me again. Ye still have time to fight for Da Queen. There's no way your weak past self would win against you. He shouted in annoyance. Unfortunately, that seemed to bring Mugetsu's morale even lower. But it wouldn't be fair. I guess I really don't belong here. We're outcasts, aren't we, Hollow? We are. But that's not gonna stop us from going further, he replied. To think of it, we should give you a name, don't you think? The Transcender said. Do what you want. Just as make it badass, said Hollow answered cockily. Okay, what about Demonio del Infierno? At this point, the black-haired male was really proud of his accomplishments in Spanish class. Tensa Zangetsu had raised a curious eyebrow while the Hollow was busy repeating his new name. Now that's really badass enough to fit me. Did you suddenly grow a brain and a pair of balls, Kinji? Mugetsu scowled. Shut up, or next time I won't be this kind again. Feeling Tensa's unmentioned questions, he continued. He's part of my power too. Felt like giving him a name just like you have. His new name might help you out in the future, he said enigmatically. Sighing, he cut off his conversation and headed to look for Urahara. Urahara-san. Mugetsu called in the dark room. A few moments later, a light was flipped open and he could see said man sitting in a chair next to a desk with a computer. Mugetsu. I take it your training with Ichigo was successful? He asked. The black-haired man nodded. I gave him these last days until we take off to relax. Well, I admit that it would be wonderful to have him train more, something that could give better chances of survival. He is still just a boy. Too much war is going to force him to mature early, something I don't want to happen, and I think neither do you. About the trip Inoue Orihime and Sato Yasutora will join you. Yorichi talked to them and trained them, Urahara informed. Seeing the absent look on the other man's face, he continued. Mugetsu-san, the man looked at him. Are you really sure that you can take down Aizen? Mugetsu frowned. I wouldn't risk so many people's lives if I couldn't. Could have just left it as it is, since he can't retrieve the Hijoku anyway, but since I can, I'd rather he doesn't complicate our situation with the Gate 13. Urahara nodded. Also, we should make a decision on what to do with the Hijoku before you leave. What do you suggest? The Transcender closed his eyes in thought, sharing a quick discussion with his partners. Hand it to me. I'll try and destroy it, he muttered. As soon as the violet orb touched the man's hand, though, it started glowing brightly, shocking both of them. The formerly orange-haired man heard a serene voice ring in his head. Kurosaki Ichigo, your heart has been deemed worthy of my servitude. I shall grant you your heart's desires. Mugetsu's eyes widened. What the scowling, he addressed the voice. I do not require your assistance. My only desire is that you are destroyed. The being giggled, truly. Then is it not true that you wish to be loved back? To be yourself in this realm? I can help you to gain your own existence here. Hearing this, he stared in shock and swallowed heavily. I don't. He felt his Zanpakuto's presence, but the sword spirit was held back by the new being. Through the struggling, Mugetsu felt a wave of despair from the sword and took a deep breath. Clearing his mind and heart, he focused on the Hijoku. Fine. I accept you. The being laughed and Tensa yelled at his wielder. The hollow was silently fuming at his actions. As soon as the Hijoku started floating towards his heart, Mugetsu entered his inner world. Violet roots were spreading from a completely white being and reaching for the blue skyscrapers. The young man that was Tensa's Zangetsu was staring at him, a disappointed frown present on his pale face. Demonio dell'Inferno was also standing on the side of a building, not even facing his king. Mugetsu stared at the new being in his soul. It was a humanoid figure, no hair or clothes present, only a pure white bone-like structure and violet eyes. "You will not regret your wise choice," the being said. "I don't," Mugetsu said, getting close to the being. When he noticed a couple of roots finally touching the buildings, he started walking faster. Reaching the being, he put a hand on its shoulder. The being was staring at him warily. "I don't and I won't because you won't be here long," he yelled, raising an arm and materializing Tensa Zangetsu. Jitsuga Tenshu. The pure black arc hit Hijoku, the being splitting cleanly in two, eyes wide even as it was fading. Ichigo the sword whispered in shock. "You really thought I'd risk my sanity just for acceptance? I'd rather work hard for it," Mugetsu said hatefully. "With this, there will be no more overpowered enemies." "You aren't that much of a pansy anymore," Demonio said grinning. The black-haired man grinned back, focusing back to the living world. Raising his hand to look at it, the Hijoku soon broke and the trapped spirits rose to the sky, disappearing. He smiled, they probably re-entered the cycle of life. He noticed Urahara staring at him in awe. He said smugly. The shopkeeper blinked again, and again. "You never cease to surprise me, Mugetsu-san," the shopkeeper said wearily. Said man only chuckled. The cold night breeze hit Mugetsu's uncovered face, making him close his eyes to relax and his long, black and unruly hair to blow back. He sighed heavily as he watched the still Karakura town from his place on a telephone pole. Memories hit him like the merciless waves of a stormy sea, a broken frown marring his features. He remembered his Yuzu's kind smile and bright eyes, Karen's similar to his scowl and laugh as they played soccer, his father's insane antics and his mother's lovely features, as well as her long, light brown hair, always neatly kept. His eyes lingered on an apartment complex, and he recalled Ishida's smartest remarks at his person, slowly followed by the memory of their fights together. The fight also brought back Chad's gentle and calm expression and his chivalry as he helped others and helped him fight the punks that always attacked him, either verbally or physically. Mugetsu's lips curled in a little smile as he imagined Orihim's bubbly antics and her weird concoctions and the way her eyes watched him as she healed him with such love he was disappointed to say couldn't return. Another breeze hit his face and he jumped on a nearby rooftop, plopping himself on it and watching Karakura, more and more bitter memories hitting him. Soon, he felt a new presence and sighed, face turning emotionless. "This is the fourth time you sighed. Did your emo alter ego finally catch up to you?" He heard a masculine voice. Chuckling, he replied, "Shut up, Yoruchi." Said cat was watching him with curious and slightly disappointed golden eyes. Sensing her unasked question, he turned to look somewhere else. Finally, after a while, he spoke, "You know, I'm really glad to be back." The cat approached him. "You certainly don't look like it." He smirked. "That's because I've finally overwhelmed you." If Cat could raise eyebrows, hers would have been raised. "Really?" she retorted unbelieving. Soon, his smirk no longer reached his eyes and he turned to look at her. "I truly am glad to be back, it's just," he trailed off and they fell into silence. A few moments later, Yoruchi spoke up, "No one's asking you to save the world. We could not stop Aizen's hand from influencing your lifetime, but I do not regret not being able to stop him because in a way, it helped you grow in the man you are now. Still, considering what may have happened to you, you have all the rights to refuse to be the hero. You have all the rights to be yourself here." Sighing, again, he smiled weakly and scratched Yoruchi's ears. "How long have you known?" Stopping her purring to answer, she chuckled. "I'm your goddamn godmother, Ichigo. I knew it the moment you arrived. Where you came from and how you did it at me lost for a while, though, and the latter still eludes me. I'm quite lost on how I got here too, believe me," Mugetsu replied, shifting himself so that he could have a better view of the sunset. The sun's rays gave the sky an orange-pink tint, reminding him of the walks with his mother. "She's still with us. Misaki-chan never stop watching us," the cat said. The black-haired male smiled, "I know. But she doesn't have to. Her job is done here. It's my turn to watch my younger self. And I have you and Kisuke, Dad, and my friends. I don't need anything else." Yoruchi inwardly smiled and she joined her student in watching the sun as it left their part of the sky and made room for the moon. "Fate, you bitch," Mugetsu mentally complained as he, his younger self, Ishida Chad, Inoue and Yoruchi in her cat form, traveled through the Dengai. Ishida had been watching him with his hawk eye, not sure if he could trust him, but seeing how he was now being ungracefully carried by Chad, he forgot about that, for the time being. Inoue on the other hand, warmed up really fast to him and even made him promise he would let her braid his hair when they got back. Chad was his usual self, nodding at him to show that he acknowledges him as a comrade and that he would fight to help him as long as he would help back. At the moment, he had a fairly nice re-meeting with his friends and almost couldn't rein in the happiness over seeing them alive. He was finally accepting the fact that he would no longer have the same bonds he had built with his loved ones, but decided that their happiness was enough and that he could create them again. While he was thinking, they had reached the end of the ride and though the others ended up kissing the ground, he gathered Reishi under his feet and landed graciously. Well, as gracious as a man can get. He watched as his younger self ended up in a rather freakish pose. He grimaced and heard Inoue make a childish comment and felt a sudden urge to laugh, even more so as he watched Ishida bring out a backup cape as Ichigo and Chad's sweat dropped. He shared a glance with Yoruichi and when she nodded, he shunpoed away behind a few vacant houses. After Ichigo fought Jidanbo and he raised the gate, just before Jin could cut his arm, he flash-stepped inside Sirite, the soon-to-be traitor, only feeling a slight breeze pass by him as the gate started falling. After the gate had closed completely, he quickly grabbed Jin from behind, covering his mouth with a hand. Until they reached the sewers, the captain had not struggled at all, as if he had the situation under control. However, one of his eyes was opened, showing a suspicious light blue eye. Releasing the Taichu, Mugetsu sighed. Alright. I'm pretty sure you don't know who I am, and I'm not gonna freak you out by starting to explain that now. Listen closely, Ichimaru-jin, for I am not gonna repeat it. You have to leave Aizen side. Ichimaru's eyes widened and he put a hand on his Zanpakuto. And don't even try to fool me, I know you're planning to end him too. At this, he removed his hand, but still looked slightly wary. If ye know I'm trying to betray him, why are ye telling me this? He asked, blue eyes searching him as if he tried to find something familiar. Because you're going to die if you follow him. I know you're trying to make Ranjiku-san happy by killing him, but she's certainly going to be worse if you die. Don't worry, I'm going to put an end to his madness. Do what he tells you to do until I interfere. Then, you will be free, Mugetsu explained. Jin stood there, staring at him in shock, but the moment he tried to ask, the black-haired male shook his head. Don't ask. I will explain someday, but now is too early. Just trust me. The 3rd Division captain nodded and with that, he flash-stepped away again, this time hiding in Urahara's cave, waiting for the moment to interfere. I sincerely hope nothing will change. Yoruichi traveled through the Sirite, searching for Ichigo's Ryatsu and going in his direction the moment she found it. Surrounded by a dreadful feeling, she remembered the plan Mugetsu shared with her. For this to work, we're going to have to repair what I changed. Aizen must not doubt anything. And so, they had told Rukia to surrender to the Soul Society soon after Ichigo finished his training. This way, they'd have way more time to train and sort things out, too. Mugetsu had already entered the Sirite through the west gate and headed for her and Urahara's training cave. He told her to teach Ichigo Bankai and let the future encounters flow. Ichigo would trust his instinct and things would go just as his older self would want them. Mentally sighing in concern, she picked Ichigo up and took him to the rendezvous point. Surprisingly, Ichigo had got the idea about Bankai very smoothly and they managed to get him achieve it in under 3 days. After that, Mugetsu pounded into him a bit until he got a vague idea about strategic thinking and use of various techniques, as well as mastering his special attack. Reaching the cave, the Shihuan princess had understood why Mugetsu had to get earlier there as he had gathered a bloody and tired Quincy and a half-dead Chad. Orihime had taken to healing their wounds though, and they recuperated pretty quickly. They had finally reached the time limit and they would have to plunge into battle again. She watched as Ichigo fixed his bandages and Ishida smoothed out any wrinkles on his outfit. Raising a slender violet eyebrow, she turned to look at Mugetsu, who had been sitting on a boulder, keeping quiet for quite a while. Nervous? She asked teasingly. To her surprise, Mugetsu nodded. Don't be. You have reasons not to be. They shared a quick glance as no further words were necessary. Ichigo, from his own corner of the room, had been watching Mugetsu too. He had learned a lot from this stranger over the few weeks they knew each other, though he has also learned to fear and respect him. His skills and strength were tremendous and he was sure he had not seen even half of it. The Shinigami found himself amazed at the pace at which he grew to trust this stranger, if only by his words, which always held the sincerity to them. Still, he could not shake off the weird feeling he had around the black-haired male. As if there was something that connected them. It made him worry, but he told himself that even if there was something horrifying behind this connection, they would be able to work together and solve it. Or at least so he had hoped. Cast off your fear, Ichigo. You are not the only one feeling that, and I assure you there is nothing you should worry about. All shall be revealed, with small, slow steps Anjetsu said inside his mind. Thanks, Asen, he mentally murmured, wiping the frown off his face. or at least, the more accentuated frown. Opening the eyes he had not realized he'd closed, the orange-haired Shinigami placed his trusty Zanpakuto on his back and prepared himself for the battles to come. Rukia could only watch as every Shinigami that even tried to stand up to Aizen met the ground, their blood covering it. She had been, albeit selfishly, hoping that they would defeat this villain, for she did not know what would come of her if he were to find out she no longer held the Hijoku. And in this moment, she knew there was no escape. Aizen had lifted her by her collar and would now use a technique with which he would supposedly be able to enter her soul to take it out. Take out what wasn't there. And just as his eyes widened, the Ice Wielder's favorite savior appeared. "Mugetsu," she whispered wide-eyed as she was once again held, this time in a bandage-garbed arm. His black hair was blown by the wind, his hakama billowing behind him like black flames. Mugetsu looked at her with his blood-red eyes, and a glint of relief surged within them. She smiled reassuringly, showing she wasn't hurt. Turning back his attention to the enemy, she saw her savior's eyes drift towards Ichigo, who nodded, this ordeal going without Aizen's notice. And despite still being present, Aizen had a shocked expression on his face, something that surprised Rukia. Inwardly, she smirked. "Karma has gotten hold of a whip, Aizen, and she's coming for you." Still, Aizen had gotten hold of his composure pretty fast. Smiling pleasantly, he slowly advanced towards them. The Kichiki, despite trusting in Mugetsu's strength, felt fear grip at her heart once again, and in turn, she gripped Mugetsu's arm. "And to whom do I owe this pleasure? Who shall I cut down next?" Aizen asked. Mugetsu did not ask, instead, moved Rukia in his other arm, the one with tattoos. Smile not faltering, Aizen continued walking towards the strange male. The black-haired male did not move from his place either, and the moment Aizen was just a foot away from him, he gripped Rukia tightly. "No words? Fine by me. You will go down silently, something that pleases me," he said, raising Kyoka Sugetsu to cut at the stranger. Only to be shocked once again. Aizen could only stare at the bandaged hand that had stopped his sword, ironically the same way he had stopped Kurosaki Ichigo's. One finger. He lifted his head to find the male's eyes, only to find a determinate stare, a will of steel behind those red eyes. Aizen stepped away from him and started throwing Kido spells at him, which Mugetsu repelled with his only free hand. And so, Aizen had tried to take him down, either with his Zanpakuto, with Hado and Bakudo, or combinations of the two. Slowly, the Gate 13 and the rest of the Ryoka group had arrived at the scene, only to stop and watch Aizen's desperate struggles. "Why?" he had finally screamed. "Why are you able to defend yourself against me? Who are you?" At this, Mugetsu put Rukia down, who proceeded to fall to her knees and started advancing towards the villain. "I am your failed experiment, Aizen Sasuke," Mugetsu bitterly said. Raising his fists, black flame like Ryatsu covered them, he punched Aizen in the face, making dust rise around the crater he had formed when he landed. The Transcender stood in one place and waited for Aizen to either come at him or run away. And, just as he expected, the madman charged. Locking his Zanpakuto with a finger, he launched another fist at the traitor, this time, meeting his sword. Not retreating, he pushed further and broke the madman's partner, then caught him by his neck. Aizen desperately looked towards Jin, who had yet to move from his place. Mugetsu smirked behind his mask. "It certainly took you a while to realize you no longer have any allies," he whispered sadistically. The older Ichigo just couldn't resist the hollow's urges. The villain's eyes darted frantically, noticing that Tausen was not there either, until he realized something. Aizen smirked. "I am afraid you are quite mistaken." And then, a rip appeared in the sky, countless Jillians appearing inside. Soon, negation was cast over Aizen, and Mugetsu had to flash step away from him. Gritting his teeth, Mugetsu summoned a black Reishi-like sword. "You are not getting away again, Aizen." The black-haired male screamed, launching towards the protected Aizen. Time seemed to flow slower as Yuruchi's eyes widened and she opened her mouth to stop him, and Rukia's heart stopped, her empty stare following their only hope to win. Mugetsu raised his sword with his right hand, the other clenched in a fist behind him, and it soon made contact with the negation. Aizen's confident smile broke and his face took an expression of horror. And the negation broke, golden pieces falling all around the Shinigami, the traitor, and the Transcender. Said Transcender had finally reached Aizen, who fell back down from his floating state. Taking a few steps back and gripping the Reishi sword with both hands, he drew it back and charged Aizen. Giving a battle cry, he plunged the sword in the enemy's chest, successfully striking his heart. The Gate could only watch in awe and slight fear as the bandage-wearing stranger let the makeshift sword disperse, making Aizen's dying form collapse to the ground. Turning his head so he could see the one that had injured him, Aizen muttered his final question. "Who or why you?" Mugetsu smiled sadly. "I am your failed experiment, Aizen. I am Kurosaki Ichigo," he whispered. Aizen moved his head slightly and he spotted a younger orange-haired, awestruck Kurosaki Ichigo lying on the ground almost the same way as him, covered by merciless cuts and surrounded by blood. Chuckling, Aizen's gaze drifted one more time towards the older version of the fiery Ryoka. And so, Soul Society's most feared enemy had given his last breath. And all hell broke loose. Mugetsu sighed and kneeled to grab his enemy's corpse and throw it over his shoulder. He readied himself for a flash step, only to be surrounded by at least 3 captains. His eyes flickered uncaringly amongst the Shinigami who were holding their swords at his neck. "Remove your blades, Soul Reapers," he said. "Ryoka, by the order of the Gate 13 and the royal family, you are hereby arrested," Soifin announced coldly. The black-haired male raised an eyebrow. "After I saved you asses? Have you no shame?" Soifin blushed in embarrassment and made a move to attack him. He simply grabbed her Zanpakuto and threw it aside. Shunsui and Jushiro Flash stepped behind Soifin, the head captain following close after them. "Soifin Taichu, Kamamura Taichu, Kichiki Taichu, step aside from the Ryoka," Yamamoto ordered. They did as told and he approached Mugetsu. "What are you going to do with Aizen Sasuke's corpse?" Mugetsu regarded him with a half stare. "I am going to bury it. He might have been a villain and a madman, but in the end, he was just a very lonely man," he said. The captains looked at him oddly and the captain commander raised an eyebrow but allowed him to pass nonetheless. The remaining leaders of the Gate 13 watched as the man disappeared in a blur of black, completely vanishing from their sight or senses. "Suteichu-sama, was it really wise to let him go?" Kamamura asked. Yamamoto didn't turn to look at him. "No man with such a heart would ever do evil. Yet, I believe all we can do is wait and watch." Kurosaki Ichigo. "Soul Society is in your group's debt as you stopped Kichiki Rukia's execution and through that stalled Aizen Sasuke's plans. Because of that, I am here to hand you the title of Substitute Shinigami, as well as this seal of approval that proves who you are," Yukitake said, handing Ichigo his badge. He then moved to face Mugetsu. "Although your group stopped Aizen's plans, you are the one who truly killed the traitor and therefore, saved the entire afterlife. Mugetsu-san, as your name needs yet to be revealed," Yukitake said this with an amused smile. "You are to be known as the protector of Soul Society and we would be honored if you would join us when a new enemy appears. If you agree, you can keep contact with the Gate 13 through Urahara Kisuke." At the end, Yukitake bowed and Mugetsu put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him as he was glad his blush could not be seen. "Mugetsu," Rukia called, approaching the Sinkamen. He only stood there as they stared at each other. The older Ichigo had to admit that he was feeling a little pained at the thought of leaving her again. He tried to say something, but he quickly closed his mouth and bit his lip. Rukia smiled. "Take care." Despite her smile, he could not return it. Instead, he took a stony expression and turned to walk towards the gate. Her smile faltered and she frowned a bit. Stopping in his tracks, he just knew he was gonna regret it. He turned to face her and clenched his fists. "I'll miss you. A lot," he murmured. Kichiki Byakuya's eyebrows twitched and Rukia stood there speechless. A dazed grin took over her porcelain features. "I'll miss you too," she whispered, blushing. Renji stared at her in shock and Mugetsu felt the need to blush too. Instead, he turned and left without any more words. He stood on Urahara's flying carpet, saying goodbye each time a friend climbed down. He chuckled when Orihime told him she'd come for his hair one of these days. Ichigo turned to look him. "Nah, Mugetsu-san. Where do you stay?" he innocently asked. Mugetsu's eyes widened. "As a matter of fact, I don't really have a place to stay." He turned to stare pleadingly at Urahara. Said scientist turned shopkeeper put his arms up in surrender. "SI has been hinting at me to organize a vacation for a long time," he mock-whined. The transcender glared at the seemingly innocent man. Ichigo's sweat dropped and raised a hand. "You could stay with me, I guess." Mugetsu turned to stare at him. Suddenly, he realized what this meant. I'd get to see Yuzu and Karen and Dad." He noticed Urahara staring at him with a knowing look. Closing his eyes, Mugetsu mentally chuckled. "Thanks, Ichigo. I'll be there in the morning. I have to get a gigai first," he replied. Ichigo nodded and got off, seeing how they arrived at his house. "See you in the morning," Ichigo said, waving. Mugetsu waved back and he, Urahara and his crew flew away. Entering his body after he ejected Khan and laying in his bed, he put his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling in deep thought. "Man, how am I gonna explain this to my family? I just hope old man won't embarrass me in front of him," he thought, blushing and covering his face with his pillow. Although he wouldn't admit it, he respected the older teen a lot and somehow always wanted to make him proud, especially after he got his ass raffle-stumped by Aizen. Sighing, he tried to brush off such thoughts. He'd never wanted to impress someone so much, and to be real, he never liked thinking of it. But for the moment, he accepted it as it was and instead chose to get a short sleep until he'd have to solve this shit. Ichigo already told them he'd offered a friend with no parents and home to stay with him, but to say that Karen was lightly surprised as she always is an understatement. Around 9 in the morning, their guest arrived. First of all, it was a he. While she doesn't take her father's words to heart, she was beginning to think her brother was really gay. Until he brought Rukia home. Then the old goat said he was a pervert, just like him. And after a while, she almost believed that, basing it on the fact that he was a teenager male. And he yet again crushed that fact. He brought home a man, not a boy. They claimed he was only about 17, yet his eyes and composure conflicted with that. Second of all, he was tall. As in, a head or so taller than her brother. So tall, she had to look up to see his face. Third of all, he had long black hair. So long, it reached the small of his back. And he had it in a high ponytail. Karen was sure that, if he let it down, it would reach past his waist. And right now, the Kurosaki family was staring at him and Ichigo in shock. Ichigo seemed to be nervous about something, another thing that led her to believe he was gay. "I'm Yugetsu. Thank you for your hospitality," the man said simply. Aizen seemed to recover from his shock and he started to cry, running to his dead wife's poster. "Masaki, my son is truly gay. He can no longer give me grandbabies. Whatever shall we do?" he whined. Ichigo covered his face with his hands, as if wanting to disappear from the scene. Yugetsu chuckled a bit and bowed to Yuzu. "It's nice to meet you." Despite her father's cries, Yuzu seemed to like this guest of theirs and immediately blushed and bowed back. "My name is Kurosaki Yuzu, Ichinai's sister." "It's nice to meet you too, Mugetsu-san," she said pleasantly. She glanced at Karen, as if telling her to introduce herself. The older twin rolled her eyes and came before the guest. "Karen," she said, sticking her hand for him to shake. "Mugetsu," he returned as if it was something normal, and shook her hand. Yuzu stared at them in confusion but brushed it off, inviting her guest inside. Out of nowhere, Aizen sprung back into action. "Nevertheless, I am going to accept you into the family, since I am the best daddy. Now come to my bosom, Mugetsu, my second son." He sang, launching himself at the black-haired teen, arms positioned for a hug. And the Kurosaki siblings stared in shock at what occurred. The moment the Kurosaki patriarch was just an arm away from Mugetsu, the teen jumped back in the air and landed a kick in the overbearing man's head, successfully digging his head in the ground. Mugetsu scoffed at the man and resumed to following Yuzu. "Sorry for the floor, Yuzu," he murmured. Karen stared at him with stars in her eyes. "Ichigo, you have my blessing. You can marry him," she said. Ichigo turned red. "What the hell, Karen?" Mugetsu raised an eyebrow. "I already love a woman," he said flatly. Ichigo stared at him in shock again, as he never expected something like that to come out of the older teen's mouth. "Ooh," the black-haired girl made. "Does she love you back?" "Karen-chan. That's private," Yuzu protested. Karen shrugged. Mugetsu frowned. Shrugging, the older teen looked away. "I don't know." Ichigo glanced at him, only to see that he had already engaged Yuzu in conversation. Frowning, he stored the thoughts related to that subject for later. After dinner, he and Mugetsu had gone to his room to simply spend the time. "Are you going to join my school?" Ichigo asked. He was lying on his bed, reading a book. Mugetsu was sitting on his desk chair, hands behind his head. "Maybe. I never really got to finish junior year," he answered. "Really?" Ichigo asked, now curious. "Why?" The older male hesitated. "I got stuck with Shinigami powers and it's a long story. Maybe I'll tell you another time." The orange head frowned and put his book aside. "Do you think I'll have to leave school because of my Shinigami powers?" "No," he answered almost instantaneously. "I'll make sure you live your life." Ichigo scowled in confusion, but he relaxed and a little smile curled his lips. "Thanks." Mugetsu didn't reply. Instead, he seemed to be staring at his guitar case. "Can I?" he finally asked, trailing off. Ichigo nodded and he stood to grab the instrument. Unzipping the case, he took out the black guitar and placed it masterfully in his lap. Checking the strings, Mugetsu took a deep breath. And struck the chords. He began playing a sad song, his mouth parting as if he was whispering lyrics. He closed his eyes when he reached the chorus and at the end, the song sounded a bit happier. Opening his eyes as his fingers left the strings, he turned to look at Ichigo. The boy was staring at him in awe. "That was where the hell did you learn such a great song? Did you compose it?" he said breathlessly. Mugetsu smiled. "My best friend composed it. It's called Will of the Heart," he replied. "Amazing," Ichigo said, grinning. "Can you teach me?" The older teen shook his head, an amused smirk present on his face. "Maybe some other time, though I don't promise to do it." The orange-haired teen looked disappointed, like a kid who can't get his favorite toy. Mugetsu chuckled at his face. "What's so funny?" Ichigo asked pouting. Mugetsu laughed even harder and the younger teen turned red and threw a pillow in his face. He stopped laughing, startled by the pillow, and gave a quiet yelp. When Ichigo laughed too, Mugetsu grabbed the pillow and climbed the bed to beat his younger self with it. Yuzu, Issen and Karen stood just outside Ichigo's room and they looked surprised to hear Ichigo laugh so much. Soon, the semester started and Ichigo had to go to school. Of course, this meant he'd have to drag his older brother as well. He had been staying with them for almost a week and his sisters had already gotten to calling him Jetsunai. Currently, he was waiting for Mugetsu to get ready as well. He was just opening his mouth to call him out when he was interrupted. "Shut up, Ichigo. I'm done," Mugetsu said, climbing down the stairs. Ichigo would have offered him one of his uniforms, but they were surprisingly too small for him and so had to go shopping with Yuzu. The older teen entitled that day the traumatic shopping spree. He had on the traditional grey pants and grey jacket, but the jacket was left open and his white shirt had 2 buttons undone. He had his hair done in a high ponytail, as usual. "Let's go," he said, grabbing a piece of bread and munching on it. "Aichai. Do a mile per hour." Ichigo greeted Kigo as usual, the latter running at him to grab him and the former clotheslining him. Mugetsu raised an eyebrow from behind them. "Did that always happen?" "Every single day," Kinji the Hollow commented. "You've been surprisingly silent for a while. What happened?" Mugetsu asked. The Hollow, for the first time in Mugetsu's life, hesitated. "We'll talk about this later, Ichigo. When we're alone." Tensa Zangetsu spoke up and with that, they cut off the mental connection. Deciding he'd worry later, Mugetsu noticed Kigo staring at him. "Ichigo, who's this guy?" he asked, pointing at him. Mugetsu scowled at kicked him over the head, digging his head in the ground like he usually did to his dad. "Don't you know it's rude to point at people?" the black-haired male asked, keeping his foot on Kigo's head. He heard muffled apologies and released him. "He's Mugetsu. Transfer student. Older than us. Lives with me and my family," Ichigo described lazily. Mugetsu glared at him. "I'm that unimportant, huh?" When Ichigo scoffed, he grabbed him in a headlock and gave him a noogie. I'm sorry." Ichigo surrendered and rubbed his head the moment the older teen released him. Kigo and Mizuru watched this occur with confused faces. After a few minutes of them bickering, Ichigo losing, they parted as Mugetsu headed for his own class. Behind him, Ichigo's female classmate sighed dreamily. "Kurosaki, was that hunk your brother?" one asked. "There's no way that cutie would be awful." Kurosaki's relative, another complained. "I mean, Kurosaki's all blinding orange. And his face is scary." Said orange head scowled as a vein throbbed in his head. He turned to glare at the gossiping girls and they cowered and dispersed. In the meanwhile, Kigo was laughing his ass off at Ichigo's predicament, successfully receiving a punch in the face from his embarrassed friend. During lunch, Ichigo asked Mugetsu to join him and his group on the rooftop. Mugetsu nibbled on the bento Yuzu made for him and the others chatted. "Nijetsu, when are you going to let Inoue braid your hair?" Ichigo teased. Their friends laughed as Orihime got all excited and Mugetsu blushed, mumbling curses at Ichigo as he looked somewhere else. "About that, why don't you cut your hair, Mugetsu-san? Doesn't it bother you?" Totsuki asked. Orihime had dragged her along. Said long-haired male frowned. "Actually, I haven't really thought about that. I guess it never really bothered me." "Why, do you like short-haired guys, Arasawa-san?" "Maybe, orange-haired." He teased, grinning at her. He knew about Totsuki's unnoticeable crush on his younger self. He wasn't blind, he just didn't have time to complicate things. He also knew it was not healthy to sacrifice your feelings like that. Unsurprisingly, Totsuki and Ichigo blushed. The others laughed and Totsuki whacked him over the head. "What the hell? We're just old friends." They shouted together. Ichigo, despite his and Mugetsu's closeness, didn't want to punch or kick the older teen like that. Mugetsu rubbed his head, smirking. "Don't worry, Arasawa-san. Your secret is safe with me," he teased further, making their public laugh even harder, and the victim pounded her fists in his arm. For the meanwhile, things had returned to normalcy. For the meanwhile, Mugetsu's dream of regaining his friend seemed reachable. The blonde male hovered somewhere above Karakura town, watching a familiar substitute Shinigami with a mysterious smirk. The smirk faded when the boy was approached by a few friends, one of which was a tall, black-haired male. "DCH." He closed his eyes for a moment, scoffing. "What's that look for, dorky teeth?" His eyes flew open and he found himself face to face with the same tall fellow he was watching a moment before. An amazing feat indeed, considering the fact that our blonde male was standing upside down, on air. He stumbled for a second, the water in his bottle flowing down, pulled by gravitation. Mugetsu watched this with amused eyes. "Seems like you didn't really expect me to pop up over here." The man shot him a look and furrowed his eyebrows. "You know why I'm here. Who are you?" Usually, I would have scolded you for not introducing yourself first, but I'll overlook it this time, Hirako Shinji, our hero said playfully. Shinji stared at him in mild surprise. I am Yujetsu, and yes, I am a wizard too, just like the boy you've been watching so carefully. Shinji narrowed his eyes. What does Aizen want? Yujetsu sighed. I'm sure he would have wanted a lot, but unfortunately, he can't really force people to submit while he's 6 feet under the ground. Look, I really have no time for this. Aizen is dead, I killed him, Soul Society owes me, I'm a wizard, and I want you to take care of Ichigo's hollow side. Just wait for me at your warehouse tonight, I'll explain more there. And with that, Shinji was left there, standing with his mouth half open, trying to process what had just occurred. Ichigo motioned for his friends to walk ahead, and he stood behind, staring with a frown at the sky. Mujetsu told him he had to take care of something and vanished. For the short time the orange-haired boy had known the older teen, Mujetsu had been very distant and mysterious. Despite their newfound close friendship, he knew near to nothing about him. He didn't know if he had a family, he didn't know where he lived, he didn't even know who was the woman he said he loved. And still, despite the slightly cold shoulder, Ichigo couldn't get himself to be angry at his friend. The way he was there for him when he was weak and the way his red eyes showed suffering when he looked at his sisters made him want to only comfort him. Scrunching his nose, he shook his head. He sounded gay. Maybe I should take up Mujetsu's offer about finding a girl to date. Oyaji's predictions are rubbing off on me. Closing his eyes and sighing, Ichigo started heading for school. He was already kinda late and he knew his sensei wasn't that relenting anymore. The door to Ichigo's bedroom opened and closed before you could blink. The orange-haired teen jumped at the sound of the door opening and turned to face the intruder, sighing in relief and slumping back the moment he recognized the blank features of Mujetsu. Something wrong? He asked carefully. Mujetsu, who had stopped walking after he closed the door and stared at the ground absently, suddenly looked back up to him, almost as if startled. He closed his eyes and shook his head, then looked at him once again. Just me and my old man musings, he joked. Turning more serious he spoke again. There's something we need to go to and take care of, but before we go, you must promise me 2 things. Ichigo scowled in confusion for a second and then nodded in determination. I'll help with whatever you need me for. Shoot. For a moment, the black-haired male seemed to smile almost bitterly, but quickly hid it. Well, it really more of your problem but anyway, first, I want you to trust me to the very core of your heart. Whatever we're going to do, it's for your own good. I would explain more, but I'd rather Yuzu and Karen not find out so early. Already, Ichigo was staring at him with raised eyebrows, as if not knowing what to make of his explanation, but he nodded nonetheless. Second, you must swear you won't start having second thoughts on what we're about to do. If you even dare, I'll beat you until you end up sharing Aizen's grave, Mujetsu finished darkly. The younger teen swallowed heavily as a bead of sweat trickled down his temple and nodded again, this time more fervently. Fine, oh so mysterious Anne. You should know by now that I trust you with my entire being, he retorted half-heartedly. Mujetsu smirked and ruffled his hair. You'd better. Alright then, we should get going. There are some people we need to see to get this taken care of. With that, they went downstairs to announce his host family of his and Ichigo's departure. Is this the place? Ichigo asked, scanning the seemingly abandoned warehouse. Mujetsu only walked further only to stop abruptly. The younger teen raised an eyebrow. The older Ichigo turned his head halfway to glance at his younger self, sending him a sharp look. Take 2 steps back. He did as told and watched as Mujetsu seemed to touch an invisible wall which blurred like a wave. He could only raise the other eyebrow too, as the black-haired male raised both arms and got in a stance, the left hand slightly behind with the palm wide open and the other clenched in a fist. Only to be startled as a black flame made of Ryatsu slipped out of the fist and the older male punched the invisible shield. Pieces of Reishi fell like broken glass and dispersed before they hit ground, but no sound came out of the impact or the shattering. He noticed Mujetsu walking again, with his hands in his pockets and quickly followed. Suddenly, a breeze flew past his cheek and his eyes widened as 8 unfamiliar faces showed themselves, each one showing a hostile expression. He realized he was falling on his butt as Mujetsu got in front of him and Black Ryatsu surrounded the 2 of them, an unnoticeable hint of killing intent slipping from the older male's body. The 8 strangers stopped in their tracks at the sign of one of them and stared at the duo. Hirako Shinji. I thought Sarate Academy teaches manners too, if the parents or legal guardians are non-existent. Seems like I am yet again proven wrong, Mujetsu said calmly, though a hint of venom was present. He certainly did not like his younger self's life threatened in such a cowardly way. Iori seemed to want to lash out at him for that comment, but Kensei successfully held her back. The aforementioned blonde took a step closer to him. I didn't want to threaten you, but you broke our shield. That's not nice. Ichigo got up as the Black Ryatsu dispersed and the older male's posture seemed to relax. Well, I did tell you I would be coming. You shouldn't have put up a barrier only to hold me out. That's not nice either, so I believe we're even, Mugetsu pointed out. Shinji nodded and his expression turned slightly more serious. His eyes flickered to Ichigo. Does he know anything yet? He asked vaguely. Not yet. But I'm not giving you the pleasure of explaining it to him. At that, Shinji pouted. Though, you could assist me while I'm storytelling. Ichigo scowled in confusion and his eyes darted between the two of them. Shinji made a sign to his 7 friends and they retreated to the shadows. Mugetsu sighed and crossed his legs, plopping himself on the ground. Shinji did the same and Ichigo could only follow. Here goes nothing, Mugetsu urged himself. Have you been having these times when something took over your common senses and you lost control of your body? Preferably, during fights. He asked simply, as if asking if he understood yesterday's homework. Ichigo hesitated but shook his head when he remembered the promise he made to the older teen. Yeah. There's been this time when I was fighting Byakuya just before Aizen's death. I felt like giving up cause my body wouldn't move and suddenly, I had this ominous feeling in my head. I blacked out and when I realized what was happening, I was already ripping at some kind of mask, half on my face, while I was still struggling to control my own hand, he explained shamefully. Shinji glanced at Mugetsu. Yeah, well, you're not the only one. The only one with sanity issues, the blonde said. Ichigo raised an eyebrow when the black-haired teen nodded. You see, that thing that's trying to take over is a hollow. An inner hollow to be precise. At his explanation, Ichigo's eyes widened in horror. Well, it is kinda bad, it's good to know that the hollow formed during the time you were regaining your powers and you weren't born with hollow powers. With exercise you could learn to control him and that's why we're here. The orange-haired teen slumped forward with his head in his hands. While he was slightly relieved to hear he could control this insanity, he still felt very wary of his own being. Can't I just get rid of this monster? He asked, a silver of despair present in his voice. At this, Mugetsu scowled and whacked him over the head, hard. Ichigo stared at his furious expression in shock. Your inner hollow is not a thing, nor a monster. No matter how harsh this may seem to you, inner hollows are derived from your own being. They're not foreign bacteria. He's only your negative traits. The hatred, the sorrow, the jealousy and the greed you would never reveal. Still, he is a part of you and you have to accept him, he explained angrily, panting a bit at the end of his mini-speech. The younger teen only stared at him slack-jawed and even Shinji looked a bit shocked at his explanation. The exiled Shinigami were known throughout their few friends for their hatred of inner hollows and harsh acceptance. He may have been awakened at his way of thinking. Slowly, Ichigo nodded. Mugetsu knows what he's doing. He definitely wants to help me. I would have to be stupid to deny his words. Seems like the only choice I have is to confirm myself. Then if I'm Shinigami, but I'm also hollow, what am I, really? At this, Mugetsu grinned. You're a hybrid, just like me and good old Shinji. We're called Vizards. Thanks for watching guys. Hope you all are enjoyed this video. If you do please leave a like, share and subscribe, also don't forget to support author of this fanfic. So let's end this video here. Until then, see you in next video.